The laughing empireth galactic empire stretched across thousands of systems, and countless stars ruling with pride, arrogance, and the firm belief that no species could ever rise to challenge their dominance. They had ships the size of moons, weapons that could melt planets, and technology so advanced even time itself bent around them. They thought they were eternal, they thought they were gods. Then one day they found Earth, a small blue world orbiting an average star on the edge of a forgotten spiral arm. The Empire's scouts laughed when they first saw the transmissions humans had sent into space, weak signals bouncing through the void carrying music greetings, and hoped. The Empire took it as comedy, nothing more than a primitive species screaming into the dark, not knowing what lurked out there, waiting. When Earth was officially brought into the Galactic Council, it was not because they were strong, it was not because they were feared, it was because of curiosity and mockery. The Empire thought it would be amusing to watch another young species struggle to understand the stars, so they extended an invitation to the humans, knowing they would accept, desperate for recognition, desperate to belong. And humans did accept, but they did not come begging. They came quiet, calm, wearing sharp black suits and speaking with words that cut deeper than any blade. Their leader, a woman named Captain Maren Holt, stood before the gathered rulers of the galaxy and smiled, not with arrogance, not with fear, but with something else, something that unsettled even those who had ruled for centuries. The council chamber was vast, glowing with blue crystal walls, and surrounded by floating thrones of the most powerful species in the galaxy, each one looking down at Holt, expecting her to bow or plead. Instead, she simply stood with her hands behind her back and listened as the Empire's speaker mocked Earth. He called humans soft meatbags with dreams too big for their boots. He laughed at their history, at their wars, at their failures, and the others joined in a chorus of laughter, ringing through the chamber. But Holt never flinched. She said nothing, she only nodded slowly, and walked out when the session ended. And while the council returned to their luxury chambers full of pride and wine and smug laughter, Holt returned to her ship and sent a silent message that activated something deep in the shadows of the solar system. Earth had known this day would come, not because they feared the stars, but because they studied them. They watched and listened, and they learned from history. Every empire falls not by strength, but by pride. And so Earth had prepared quietly, patiently, while the world showed holograms of peace and progress. Deep in the Kuiper Belt, far beyond Pluto, something was being built. Not one ship, not 10, but an entire fleet, invisible to every known scanner, powered by technology no alien had ever imagined, and led by minds trained not in politics, but in survival. They called it Project Phantom, and it was humanity's answer to arrogance back on Earth. The media showed images of unity, human children waving flags beside aliens, human cities decorated with floating banners of the Galactic Council, but beneath the surface, in underground bunkers and dark military labs, something else was moving, a different kind of progress, one that did not believe in showing teeth unless needed. And so when the Empire laughed, when they mocked Holt in front of the universe, Earth simply nodded and waited, because they knew the stars had teeth too, and the Empire had never bothered to check if Earth had grown its own. Holt returned to the diplomatic embassy on the neutral moon of Aelia Prime. Her quarters were simple, with nothing more than a desk, a screen, and a window showing the swirling gas storms below. She poured herself a glass of water, stared into the distance, and pressed her thumb on a hidden pad. The screen lit up with a single word: confirmed. At that moment, deep in the void, the cloaked ships powered up engines, running silent, weapons charged, crews standing ready, not to attack, but to watch, to learn, to wait. The first phase was always the same: observe, gather patterns, study weaknesses, understand what made giants fall and what made shadows grow strong. For now the Empire laughed, and Earth said nothing, but the game had already begun, and this time it would not be fought with speeches or flags or councils. It would be fought in silence, and silence was something humans had mastered long ago. They had watched from the dirt, dreamed under burning skies, built machines from sand and steel, and they had waited for their moment, not to ask for a place, but to claim it. And Holt, sitting alone on that moon, smiled again, not because she was amused, but because she knew something the Empire did not. They were still playing chess, while Earth had already changed the board, and out there, far beyond the eyes of empires, ghosts were moving silently, waiting, watching, ready to remind the stars that humanity had come not to bow, but to rise. Shadows in the void, while the Galactic Empire carried on with its games and speeches, while the council halls echoed with prideful laughter and dismissive words, Earth moved in silence and in shadow. It did not protest, it did not complain, it did not try to prove itself, because proving oneself to a blind enemy was a waste of breath. And so Earth became quiet on the surface, polite in the meetings, respectful in the news channels and broadcasts, But beneath that mask something vast was growing deep in the cold dark outer rim of the solar system, far beyond the icy rocks of Pluto and Eris. There existed no lights, no beacons, no stations, only blackness and silence, and in that silence Project Phantom was born. Project Phantom was not a fleet. It was not an army, it was an idea, a response to power, not with more power, but with precision. And silence, Earth's best minds were chosen not by politics or titles, but by merit, by grit, by vision. Engineers, programmers, pilots, tacticians, all selected carefully, all taken off the grid, officially missing or reassigned to unknown locations. They worked without sunlight, without fame, without rest. They built ships not meant to be seen, vessels shaped like ghosts, no hull markings, no lights, no emissions. They floated in space, invisible to scanners, made of dark alloy lined with energy dampeners, powered by zero-trace fusion cores and cloaked by adaptive, light-bending armor that tricked even the sharpest eyes. And sensors. The Empire believed in overwhelming power. They believed in showing strength by sheer numbers, by size, by spectacle. But Earth believed in a different kind of war, one that struck only when needed, one that did not roar but whispered. And so the Phantom Fleet began to grow in the depths of the void. Every ship had a name, whispered, not shouted, names like Wraith, Shadowblade, Obsidian, Drift. Every ship had a crew trained not in parade formation, but in silence and infiltration and hacking and disabling instead of destroying. And leading all of them was Captain Holt, not just a diplomat, not just a representative. She was the architect, the commander, and the one who had been planning this for years. Holt had been chosen long ago, not because she smiled in the council halls, but because she understood war not as glory, but as necessity. Her mind worked like a map, always moving, always calculating. She had once commanded Black Ops missions on Earth long before space travel had reached the stars, and now she commanded a fleet no one knew existed, not even Earth's allies, only a few within the highest level of Terran defense. Command knew of Project Phantom, and even they did not know its full scale. They did not need to, they only needed to trust. And Earth had learned long ago that trust was earned, not bought. Each ship in the Phantom Fleet had artificial intelligence, not to replace the crew, but to support them. AI that could think, adapt, learn, predict enemy movements, jam signals, override protocols in real time. These were not mindless programs, but companions born from quantum neural design, capable of speech, emotion, strategy. They worked with the crew like shadow partners, alert, calm, deadly when needed. Every soldier in the fleet was trained for this mission, for years. Simulations and zero-gravity combat training in silence, hacking alien systems, language decoding, stealth, survival. Discipline was absolute. Loyalty was earned through shared purpose, not orders. Meanwhile, the Empire continued to mock Earth. Their media called humans cute. The council members often used humans as the butt of their jokes, calling them softskins or mudwalkers. Holt attended every meeting with the same calm smile, said the same polite words, took the same notes. But her eyes saw everything. She noticed the blind spots, the ego, the patterns of routine. She noted the security flaws, the way Imperial ships broadcast their positions, the way their defense grids operated, the overconfidence in their own systems. And she passed every detail back to the void, where AI systems absorbed it, processed it, fed it into simulations until every weakness was charted and mapped. Like a predator memorizing the rhythm of its prey. Back on Earth, only a few knew the truth. The general public believed in peace. They saw humans shaking hands with aliens. They saw the council footage and believed the galaxy was a place of cooperation. But in bunkers beneath the Atlantic, in tunnels beneath the Himalayas, command rooms flickered with silent updates as the Phantom Fleet ran drills, prepared payloads, tested cloaks, and rotated patrols. They were not waiting for war, they were preparing for it, because Earth had no intention of starting a war, but every intention of ending it, if it ever came. Captain Holt stood once again in her quarters on Aurelia Prime, looking out at the swirling colors of the gas moon below, her hands clasped behind her back as her AI assistant projected fleet updates in the air. Status green across the board. Infiltration units had begun operations, planting observation bugs inside neutral zones, hacking communication satellites, recording data from Empire fleets, and even quietly helping some lesser species resist Imperial pressure without ever being seen. Earth was not only building a fleet, it was building information networks, resistance cells, contingency plans, and Holt oversaw it all like a chess master watching the board from above. And though the Empire kept laughing, though the council kept ignoring Earth's silence, the void was shifting. Something unseen was taking shape, a force built not of arrogance, but of preparation. And when the time came, when the Empire pushed too far and stepped on something they should not have even known existed, it would not be fire or fury that met them. It would be cold precision from the shadows of the void, and they would not even know it had begun, until it was already too late. Empire's mistake of galactic empire had conquered over 1,000 species in its rise to domination. Its ships had crushed rebellions, its fleets had burned moons, its soldiers had walked proudly through the ashes of fallen cities for generations. They had done this without fear, without challenge, without ever questioning if their rule was eternal. And when Earth joined the Council, the Empire saw no reason to treat them differently. They saw weakness, simplicity, humility, and to the Empire these were signs of submission. They did not understand the kind of strength that grows in silence. They did not understand humans in the Outer Rim. There was a human colony named Varela established peacefully on a resource-rich moon under the legal protection of the Galactic Council. The colony was small, only a few thousand settlers, scientists, engineers, and children. They farmed, they mined, they sent peaceful reports, they followed all interstellar laws. They never armed themselves or showed hostility, but to the Empire it did not matter, because Varela was rich in xerelium, a rare crystal used in high-end energy weapons and star drives, and the Empire had long wanted sole control of that moon, but Earth held the claim and refused to sell or Sharion Day. Without warning, a squadron of Imperial destroyers dropped from hyperspace into Varela orbit. They broadcast a false message claiming the colony had been seized by pirates, and within minutes the sky rained fire. The orbital stations were wiped clean. The civilian transports trying to flee were vaporized, and the surface facilities were torn apart by beam strikes and kinetic rounds. No warning, no mercy, no survivors. The attack lasted 15 minutes. And then the destroyers vanished without trace. The Empire later released a report claiming they had neutralized a criminal outpost. Earth remained silent when the news reached the Galactic Council. Captain Holt stood in the middle of the chamber, her face still, her voice calm, and she asked only one question. She asked for access to the Imperial sensor logs to verify the claim of piracy. The Empire refused. The Council shrugged and moved on, and that was the moment the Empire made its true mistake, because they believed silence meant submission. They believed calm meant weakness, and they believed Earth would forget, just as the other species had before them. But Earth never forgot. In the deep nothing of space, the Phantom Fleet received a single signal from Holt, silent and untraceable, and the mission began. The first wave of stealth recon ships jumped into Empire space undetected. They moved like shadows along the trade lanes, watching, scanning, collecting data on fleet movement, on patrol schedules, on station defenses. They infiltrated communication relays, hijacked drones, bypassed security systems, and then they vanished again, leaving no trace and no sound, but taking everything with them. And as days passed, more Imperial vessels began to disappear. Patrol frigates went silent near asteroid belts. Scout ships failed to return from survey missions. Sensor buoys went dark. One by one, the Empire blamed technical glitches. They suspected pirates. They even accused rival species, but they never once suspected Earth, because Earth still sat silently in the Council chambers, still gave polite responses, still signed every treaty with a smile. But deep inside, Holt had drawn a line, and Earth had begun to move, not with bombs or speeches, but with purpose. The Phantom Fleet initiated Phase 2, disabling strategic outposts across minor sectors through cyber attacks and localized EMP strikes, knocking out power grids across Empire colonies, leaving their defenses blind and confused. And every time no one saw it coming, on the outer edge of the Orion Corridor, an elite Empire battlecruiser named Invictus disappeared entirely. Its last transmission was routine, its flight path safe and mapped. Its crew never called for help, and its black box was never found, because Earth had claimed it. In complete silence, the ship was now docked inside a hidden Terran facility, being studied, stripped, and copied. Its systems decoded, its weaknesses exposed. Not a soul knew what happened, and the Empire began to panic quietly, still unwilling to show fear publicly. But commanders whispered behind closed doors, and intelligence agents chased shadows that had no form. Back on our Alia Prime, Holt walked alone through the diplomatic wing, her face calm as always, her hands behind her back, and her thoughts already deep in strategy. She had stopped attending council meetings unless necessary, instead focusing entirely on preparation. She was not seeking revenge. She was executing justice, not with fire, but with silence. And the message Earth prepared was not for the Council, but for the Empire. It was not a warning, it was a mirror. And soon they would be forced to look into it and see the truth of what they had awakened. The Phantom Fleet, now numbered in the hundreds, spread across Empire territory, without ever being seen, integrated into asteroid fields, docked within derelict moons, floating just outside sensor range. Every crew trained, every AI sensed, every weapon ready, but still Earth had not struck fully, not yet. Because Holt was waiting for the moment the Empire would realize that ghosts were real, that they had never been alone in their space, and that their skies were no longer. The Zalanath Empire continued its broadcasts declaring strength, denying any weaknesses. Even as their own people whispered about invisible enemies, about ghost ships and failing systems, they still mocked Earth publicly, still called them cowards and dreamers, but every insult now sounded a little more forced, a little more afraid. And Holt, standing in her quarters, watched it all unfold through hundreds of unseen eyes and ears scattered across the stars, and she smiled, not in victory, not in pride, but in readiness, because the board was set, and the next move would not be silent, it would be undeniable. The first ghost strike. The Galactic Empire had always trusted the size of its fleets, the firepower of its weapons, and the fear it could plant in the hearts of its enemies. It never believed in the quiet, it never prepared for the unseen, and it certainly never imagined that a species as young as humanity would become the source of its unraveling. But while the Empire sat proud in its illusion of control, the Phantom Fleet moved like cold wind through cracks no one thought existed. And the first blow would not come with flames or declarations, it would come with a whisper, and leave only silence behind. It began in the Tharnas sector, a region on the far edge of Empire territory, rich in resources, and dotted with refueling depots and military stations. The Empire maintained tight control over it, using it as a strategic launching point for patrols and war exercises. One of its stations, Tharnas Prime, held hundreds of Empire soldiers, and was protected by 3 orbital defense platforms. It was considered untouchable, secure in every way, with reinforced shields and automated detection systems. What no one in the Empire knew was that for the past 3 months the station had already been compromised. While the commanders slept and the crews rotated, Earth stealth drones had infiltrated the outer shells of the orbital defenses. They had injected microscopic AI units into the system's AI that slowly learned, mapped, and rewrote protocols without alerting anyone. And when the time came at exactly 0 to 100 station time, the platforms went dark without warning. One by one the lights blinked off, shields failed, communications dropped to static, and for 3 minutes Tharnas Prime was completely blind. And in that time 3 Phantom-class corvettes moved in close and silent. They docked with the main hangars, cut through the hull, and deployed infiltration teams equipped not with bullets but with pulse weapons coded to stun, and override gear coded to disable power instead of destroy. Soldiers on Tharnas Prime never fired a shot. Within 7 minutes the entire station had been taken, not a life lost, not a scream heard, just a slow collapse into silence. The infiltration team copied the entire command database, extracted every communication log, and virus tagged the central hub with a trace protocol that would link to every other connected military post in the region. And then, without ever being seen, the corvettes disengaged and vanished back into the black, their trails masked by distortion fields and light refraction shields. The station slowly powered back up, systems restarted, and when the Empire sent technicians to investigate the next day, they found nothing wrong, nothing broken, nothing missing. But from that moment forward, every signal sent from Tharnas Prime became Earth's doorway back in the hidden command center. Buried beneath the icy crust of Europa, Holt stood before a massive holomap, flickering with data, pulsing with real-time updates as the entire Tharnas network unfolded before her eyes. From troop movement to patrol routes to emergency response protocols, Earth now knew it all, and she said nothing. She only gave a nod and walked to the next room where her strategic officers prepared for the next insertion, because Tharnas was not the goal. It was only the first echo of something larger. 2 days later, another Empire patrol ship, the Righteous Gale, went missing in Sector Navarre. Its path had been routine, a simple patrol loop near an asteroid belt with no recorded threats. It never returned, and its last message was static. The Empire sent recovery drones, but found no debris, no signal, not even a radiation trail, because the Righteous Gale had been taken by Earth's sleeper ships, vessels placed months ago disguised as inactive mining rigs waiting for the signal. When the patrol came close, the sleeper ship activated, jammed the patrol sensors, and neutralized the crew using neural waves tuned specifically to the Empire's physiology. Every crew member was placed into stasis, and the ship was towed silently into the dark, to be studied, repurposed, and erased from records. News of the missing ships and strange outages began to spread within Empire ranks. Junior officers whispered of ghost fleets, command staff dismissed it as nonsense, but deep down unease began to grow. And still Earth said nothing. Holt returned to the council chambers only once, to attend a ceremonial address, and when the Empire representative mocked Earth, again calling them masters of delay and shadows, Holt gave only one sentence in reply: She said Earth would like to speak in its own language now. And then she walked out, leaving silence behind her, and confusion in her wake. Meanwhile, across the Empire, territory systems began to report strange anomalies, power grids flickering at precise intervals, drone stations losing navigation data, supply routes facing unexpected shortages, as if someone had known exactly where to hit and how to make it look like coincidence. And at the heart of it all was Earth's growing network of intelligence cells. Small teams of human operatives trained in silence and stealth deployed into neutral zones, and border worlds blending into markets and repair docks, gathering whispers, planting bugs, decoding shipments. They carried no flags, wore no insignia, and left no trace. But every step they took carved deeper into the Empire's blind spots in the depths of space beyond the spiral edge. The full Phantom fleet had gathered for the first time. 100 warships, black as void, drifting silently, waiting for orders. Destroyers with silent missiles, frigates with hacking pods, cruisers built for suppression, not slaughter. They formed a net invisible to every Empire scan, and at the center floated Holt's flagship, the Eclipse, a vessel unlike anything the galaxy had seen, not large, not small, but perfectly shaped for command. Its AI, known as Viren, processed 1 billion signals a second. Its hull could bend light around it. Its systems could override entire networks within seconds. And it carried no conventional weapons because it did not need them. It carried fear and precision. And when it decloaked, it would not be to attack but to remind the stars that Earth had arrived when the time came, when the curtain was lifted and the invisible became undeniable. The Empire would finally understand that the humans they had laughed at had never been the joke. They had simply been the silence before the storm, revealing the shadows. The Empire believed it still had time, believed the stories of missing ships and failing systems were just scattered problems, believed the whispers of ghost fleets and vanishing stations were myths spread by frightened officers desperate to explain incompetence. They kept the Fawade strong. They marched their soldiers across the council chambers. They launched their propaganda through galactic channels. They called humanity a background species unfit for real conflict, and they still mocked Holt and Earth and the silence with which they had moved. But that silence had reached its end, and when it broke, it did not shatter like glass. It moved like thunder in one coordinated moment across 17 sectors of Empire territory. The Phantom fleet emerged not with fire, but with presence. They decloaked above critical installations, mining outposts, fleet yards, and planetary defense hubs, each Earth vessel positioning itself with mathematical precision, each one linked through the AI network, forming a web of invisible control. And the sky changed without a single shot fired across those sectors. Empire commanders looked up from their screens and saw ships where there had been none, weapons aimed, systems neutralized, escape impossible, and still no demand had been made. No threat had been issued on the Empire's capital world. Thousands of citizens stopped in the middle of their day, when the sky darkened not from clouds but from hundreds of small shapes slowly uncloaking above them, hovering silently above the skyline. Like shadows turned real buildings, cast long new shapes as the Earth vessels floated, without movement, without noise. And then every screen across the capital, every device connected to the network flickered and displayed one image: Captain Holt, standing tall behind her, the flag of Earth, and behind that a still frame of the Eclipse, surrounded by the Phantom fleet. Holt did not smile this time. She only spoke 7 words. Sigh laughed. We prepared, now you listen. At that moment across Empire space, the AI virus, embedded through months of infiltration, activated silently, paralyzing security networks, disabling fleet communications, corrupting logistics databases, and locking down defense systems. Entire hangars sealed shut. Drone carriers refused to launch. Warships lost targeting data, and navigational paths scrambled into chaos. The Empire's might had not been destroyed, it had been disconnected. Every system turned against itself, every protocol rewritten by Earth's hidden hand. And panic spread faster than any explosion. The Emperor demanded an emergency council session, called for immediate retaliation, declared Earth an enemy of the stars. But as he spoke, the lights in his grand hall flickered once, and then every screen around him turned to black. And Holt's voice echoed through hidden speakers, even inside the most secure palace in the galaxy. Her voice calm, quiet, final. She said, "This is not retaliation, this is a reminder." And then every light in the palace went out. The throne room plunged into darkness, and the Emperor silenced not by weapons, but by the weight of total helplessness. In the council chamber, chaos erupted. Ambassadors shouted, demanded answers. Some begged Earth for restraint, others threatened back. But Earth's seats remained empty except for one small device placed in front of the empty chair. It played a single repeating message. It said, "Earth will no longer ask for permission. Earth will no longer bow. Earth will no longer be silent." And still no fleet moved, no cities burned. Earth had not come to destroy the Empire. Earth had come to end its illusion of control, and neutral planets across the galaxy. Species, once too afraid to speak, now rose with voices louder than ever. Protests erupted against Empire occupation. Rogue fleets defected. Trade routes were rerouted to Earth-aligned worlds, and in the shadows, new alliances began to form, ones that did not center around size or legacy, but around respect and balance. And the symbol of that new wave was not a war banner or a fleet formation. It was a single image of Holt standing in silence, with the ghost fleet behind her and a galaxy no longer laughing within the eclipse. Holt watched through the holomap as the Empire systems pulsed red one after another. Every node compromised, every command delayed, every authority challenged, and she said nothing. She only raised her hand and motioned for the fleet to hold position, because this war would not be won by conquering. This war would be won by never firing a shot and yet gaining complete submission, because that was true power, not destruction, but control. And Earth now held it fully aboard Empire flagships. Captains debated orders, some wanted to fight, others hesitated, some tried to launch weapons, only to find their controls frozen, overridden by silent Earth programs designed to predict and block every standard protocol. Even manual overrides failed, as bridge officers watched in horror their mighty vessels turned to drifting statues under the cold eyes of invisible watchers. And still not one Earth ship fired, because Holt had ordered silence until the very end. And then came the final step. A fleet-wide broadcast from Holt to the Empire military, to the Council, to every connected planet across the Empire territories. She spoke slowly, clearly, with no anger and no pride. She said, Earth did not seek war, but it does not accept mockery. Earth does not want to rule, but it will not kneel. Earth will not raise its hand unless it is forced to, but when it does, that hand will not tremble and it will not miss. And then she ended transmission, and the stars held their breath, because in that silence something greater than fear had been born. Respect to her. Without fear, the Empire had faced war before. It had crushed uprisings, burned planets, shattered fleets, and left ruins where once stood proud civilizations, but never in all its history had it faced an enemy that did not strike with weapons. Never had it faced an enemy that could take the strength from its hands without spilling blood. The Phantom Fleet hung like a shadow over its systems, unseen one day, undeniable the next, and everywhere its presence was felt. Ships frozen in space, power grids collapsing, defense codes rewritten in silence. Yet nothing was destroyed, no civilians harmed, no territory claimed. And this absence of destruction made the fear worse, because no one could measure the limits of what Earth was willing or able to do. The Emperor called his high command to the War Council. They gathered inside the core bunker of the capital, a chamber buried beneath kilometers of steel and rock, protected by shielded corridors and triple-sealed gates, the most secure place in the Empire, or so they believed. The generals argued over responses. Some demanded immediate fleet launches, others demanded counter-infiltration. Some even suggested abandoning sectors to regroup. But as they argued, the main display in the chamber flickered and then cleared to show Holt standing aboard the Eclipse, the stars glowing behind her, calm, as if she were speaking from a diplomatic reception rather than deep inside enemy space. Her voice was low, steady, and absolute. She told them that Earth had no interest in their throne or their colonies, but it would no longer allow their cruelty. She told them that they would dismantle their war machine, disband their occupation fleets, free the worlds they had enslaved, and accept a new balance, or Earth would take away their ability to move, to fight, to even travel between stars. She gave no deadline, no threat, just a choice. The Emperor laughed, not because he thought it was a joke, but because he could not admit fear in front of his generals. He ordered Holt's image cut from the feed, but the display did not respond. No matter what his technicians tried, they could not remove her voice or her face. And when he finally shouted for the system to be shut down completely, the lights across the War Council chamber died. Every console, every panel, every source of power fell into blackness. The backup generators refused to start, and the heavy doors sealed from the outside, trapping the most powerful leaders of the Empire in the dark for 6 hours before the systems returned on their own whim. The doors finally opened. The generals left in silence. They did not meet each other's eyes, because they knew now what Holt had meant. Earth could reach anywhere at any time. They had built an empire on fear, and now that fear belonged to someone else across the galaxy, Earth's influence grew. Without firing a shot, the neutral races, who had once looked away from imperial cruelty, now spoke up. Trade shifted quietly to human-controlled routes. Colonies under imperial watch began to experience sudden system failures that made control impossible, and in every place the Empire weakened. Another species stepped forward, to claim independence. None of them knew exactly how it was happening, but they all knew who was responsible, and for the first time in galactic memory, Earth was no longer the youngest, weakest voice. It had become the voice others listened to. Now Aurelia Prime Holt walked through the diplomatic halls as if nothing had changed. To the casual eye, she was the same calm representative she had always been, but now every ambassador she passed lowered their voice. Every rival glanced away, every ally nodded with something more than courtesy behind their eyes. She carried no weapon, wore no armor, but the weight of the invisible fleet followed her like a shadow. The Clips remained at the center of the Phantom Fleet, positioned on the edge of Imperial space, not blockading, not threatening, simply existing as a reminder. Each ship cloaked, once again vanishing into the void, but always ready. The AI network continued to monitor every Imperial movement, every shift in supply chains, every military exercise. Nothing escaped its reach. The Empire could not even replace a sensor ray without the Phantom Fleet knowing this was war without fire, a campaign waged with silence, precision, and control. The kind of war humanity had learned from centuries of history. On Earth itself they had fought too many battles where victory came at the cost of everything, and they had learned that the greatest victory was not to destroy an enemy, but to make them unwilling to fight at all. Holt understood this, and so she kept the fleet still. She allowed the Empire to surrender piece by piece without forcing them to bleed, because blood brought vengeance, but humiliation brought submission, and that was far harder to undo. Weeks passed, and the Empire's posture changed. The propaganda against Earth grew softer. The public speeches became more cautious. Fleet movements shrank from the borders. One by one, the occupied worlds were granted autonomy, not through negotiation, but through quiet orders from the Emperor himself. Holt never demanded credit. She never stood in the council chambers to declare triumph. She simply watched from the shadows and ensured the balance held. When the final occupied system in the Orion Corridor was released without a single human ship moving into its space, Holt knew the war was over, not ended with treaties or signatures, but ended in the minds of those who once believed they could rule unchallenged, and now feared even the possibility of Earth's shadow appearing above their skies. The galaxy had seen many wars, but this would be remembered as the war that was never fought and yet was decisively won. And the lesson would linger far longer than any battle scar, because every leader, every admiral, every citizen of the Empire now knew that somewhere in the silent dark the humans were watching, and they would never again be underestimated. The new voice among stars. Great council chamber was full yet silent. Every seat taken, every representative present, but no voices dared to rise above a whisper. The last weeks had stripped away the arrogance that had once filled these halls. The banners of the Galactic Empire still hung high, but their colors no longer carried the same weight. They were symbols of a past that could no longer return. The Empire still existed, but its grip had loosened. Its fleets stayed close to home. Its commanders hesitated before issuing orders, and its citizens looked to the skies with a new kind of caution, for they knew the silence that hovered there belonged to Earth. When Captain Maren Holt entered the chamber, she walked without hurry, her step steady, her gaze fixed forward. No guards accompanied her, yet the path before her cleared instinctively. As ambassadors moved aside without thinking, her presence was no longer that of an outsider seeking a voice. It was the presence of one who had proven without question that she already had won. The central days awaited her, and as she reached it she paused, letting the quiet settle until even the faint hum of the air system seemed loud. Then she spoke, not in anger, not in triumph, but in the calm tone of one delivering truth. She told them the age of unchecked conquest was over. She told them that the stars did not belong to those who could take them by force, but to those who could share them. She told them that Earth did not seek thrones or crowns, that humanity had no interest in ruling, but every interest in ensuring that no species would be mocked, enslaved, or erased simply because it was young or small or different. Her words did not echo like the speeches of the Empire's rulers. They settled in the minds of the listeners, carried weight without volume. The Emperor sat across the chamber watching her, his expression unreadable. Weeks earlier he had stood proud, issuing orders to crush his enemies. Now he listened in silence, his fleets grounded, his power fractured by invisible hands. The humiliation was his to bear, but even in defeat he understood that his empire had survived only because Holt had chosen not to destroy it. The lesson was bitter, but it was a lesson none at the Lesholt continued speaking, laying out a vision for a council where every voice was equal, where disputes were settled before weapons were drawn, where the powerful acted as protectors rather than predators. She spoke of alliances built on trust rather than fear, and she spoke of the shadows, the kind that Earth now commanded. She made it clear they would remain the unseen guardians of that balance. and that anyone who tried to tip it back toward oppression would find those shadows. Standing in their skis around the chamber, some ambassadors nodded, others kept their faces still. But the shift was there, the recognition that humanity was no longer a novelty or a curiosity. It was a force woven into the fabric of the galaxy, not through conquest, but through proof, the proof that even the smallest voice could grow, until it could silence the loudest. Outside the chamber, the Phantom Fleet remained in position, scattered across the void, invisible, but present, each ship cloaked, drifting patiently. Within reach of critical points across known space, their crews rotated their systems, ran constant scans. Their AIs monitored billions of data streams. No one outside Earth's command knew exactly where they all were, and that uncertainty was their strength. Neutral worlds that had once been quiet observers now found courage in this new order. Trade expanded between them and Earth. Cultural exchanges flourished. Knowledge flowed in both directions, and slowly a network began to form, one not bound by territory, but by shared intent to prevent the return of the galaxy's old ways. Holt knew this was fragile, that balance was never permanent. But she also knew it was a beginning, and beginnings were powerful. If guarded well, weeks turned into months, and the memory of the day the Phantom Fleet revealed itself did not fade. It became part of the whispered history told in every port and station, the story of how the galaxy's greatest empire was brought to its knees without a war by a species it had laughed at. That story became a warning and a reminder that arrogance could blind even the mightiest, and Earth life continued its pace. Cities glowed in the night, oceans rolled under clear skies. People went about their lives unaware of every detail, but aware enough to know that their place in the galaxy had changed. They were no longer explorers hoping for a seat at the table. They were now the ones who had built their own seat and made sure no one could take it away. Holt returned home only briefly, her time spent mostly aboard the Eclipse, moving between sectors, meeting with allies, watching the slow transformation of the Council. She never spoke of victory because she knew the work was never finished. She never declared peace because she knew peace was not a permanent state, but a constant effort. But she did allow herself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction when she looked out at the stars and knew that somewhere out there the shadows she had shaped still moved. Watching Red-Eyed Emperor eventually addressed his own people in a speech stripped of the bombast that had once been his trademark. He spoke of change, of shifting priorities, of focusing inward on rebuilding. He did not name Earth. He did not need to. Everyone understood who had forced this change and why it had been allowed to happen without Firius. The seasons turned. The Council began to reflect Holt's vision slowly. The smaller worlds gained more say. The great powers measured their actions more carefully. The space between the stars seemed just a little less dangerous, and though the galaxy remained vast, unpredictable, and full of potential threats, it also held something it had not in generations, a sense that there was someone out there, willing to stand in the dark and watch over it, not for dominance, not for tribute, but because it was right. And so the new voice among the stars was not the loudest, or the most ancient. It did not shout its authority, it did not demand obedience. It simply existed, strong enough to be felt, calm enough to be trusted, feared enough to be respected. Humanity had found its place not by bending the galaxy to its will, but by showing the galaxy that even in the coldest, emptiest reaches there was a power that would not be ignored, a power that had been born from the dirt and oceans of one small blue world and had risen to stand where no one expected it. The stars remembered the day the shadows appeared, and they would not forget, because the silence of that moment still lingered, and in that silence was Earth's promise. You are here, we will not bow, we will watch. Council chamber was filled with every leader and representative from across the known galaxy, yet the air inside felt heavier than it ever had before. The banners of the Galactic Empire still hung high in defiance, but they were no longer the unshakable symbols of power they once were. They were relics of an age that had been broken not by fleets of equal size, but by a force the Empire had never understood, the force of silence, precision, and patience, and that force now had a face. Captain Maren Holt of Earth entered without escorts, without ceremonial fanfare, and yet every eye followed her. Every step was measured, calm, but carrying the weight of what she represented. This was not the walk of a leader who had been given power. This was the walk of one who had taken it by proving it and kept it without firing a single shot. She stepped onto the central platform and let the quiet remain long enough that the smallest sound echoed in the hall. She scanned the room, once her expression steady, and began to speak in the same voice that had cut through pride and noise. Without needing to rise above it, she told them that the days of unchecked conquest were over. She told them that the stars were vast enough for every species to stand without being crushed by another. She reminded them that Earth had not come to rule, but it would never kneel. and it would never allow the cruelty and mockery that had been shown to it to be shown to others. She spoke of alliances built not from fear, but from respect. She promised that the shadows humanity commanded would remain watching, guarding, and that they would move only when the balance was broken. The Emperor sat in his high seat at the far end of the hall, and for the first time in living memory he did not interrupt. He did not smirk, he did not posture. His fleets had been grounded, his power weakened, and deep down he understood that it had been mercy, not weakness, that had spared him. He listened because there was no choice, and because the truth of her words had already been carved into the fate of his empire. On the chamber, some faces softened, others stayed hard, but every single one of them knew that the smallest voice in the galaxy was no longer small. Earth's silence had become louder than any war cry, and that silence now lived in the mind of every ruler, every admiral, every citizen who looked to the sky beyond the council walls. The Phantom fleet drifted cloaked across the edges of star systems, its ships invisible yet near enough to strike in minutes. Every AI still watching, every human crew still ready. They did not need to reveal themselves again. The memory of the day they had done so was enough to keep order across sectors. The shadows were now part of the galaxy's unspoken law. Trade shifted toward human-aligned worlds. Independent systems began to speak with more confidence. Smaller races began to shape their own futures. The balance was fragile, but it was no longer an illusion. It was a living thing guarded by those who had risen from a single small blue planet in the quiet arm of the galaxy. Holt knew it would always need defending. She knew the work was never done, but she also knew that for now the galaxy had taken a step away from the darkness that had ruled it for so long. She left the chamber without looking back, her figure disappearing through the great doors, her words still lingering in the air. Outside she boarded the Eclipse, the flagship waiting in silent orbit, its dark hull blending into the stars as it turned toward the edge of space, beyond the reach of most sensors, beyond the reach of most courage. And there in the endless quiet, Holt stood on the command deck looking out at the scattered lights of distant systems, each one a reminder of how far Earth had come from being a target of laughter to being the unseen hand that could change the course of empires. The Emperor returned to his throne that day knowing it would never again carry the same weight, because somewhere out there in the darkness a fleet was watching, and it belonged to those he had once called weak. The galaxy would remember that lesson, not because Earth demanded it, but because it could never forget it. So the story of humanity's rise in the stars did not end with a battle cry or the fall of an empire. It ended with silence, and the knowledge that silence was enough, because in that silence there was strength, there was protection, there was the promise that should the galaxy ever tip toward tyranny again, those shadows would return, and the laughter of the powerful would once more be replaced by mirth and